Remember Ninjago? You know, the show about the colourful Lego ninjas you'd catch on Cartoon Network as a kid? I don't know if you know or not, but that show's still going. Beginning 2 seasons ago, Ninjago has had a story arc in the background about a mysterious Vengestone buyer that the ninja must track down. Crystallize had the big task of not only wrapping up this plot thread, but also wrapping up the entire Ninjago storyline up to that point. To say the results may vary is an understatement to say the least. Crystallize's biggest problems begin with its absolute refusal to allow anything interesting from the previous season's Seabound to stand. Despite Seabound being a worse retread of Season 1, it left the viewer with a very intriguing note. Nia is gone, Kai and Jay will have to work through their grief, Ben-Famar must start his quest to retake his kingdom. Straight off the bat, Farewell the Sea throws away any kind of potential for following up on Ben-Famar's quest by relegating it to a throwaway line.
Even Ben-Famar has given up hope to find her. He sent a message that he's returned to rule Merlopia. Good for him, I guess.
Oh, what's that you say? Jay and Kai are grieving the loss of Nia? No, they aren't. One of Crystallize's biggest missed opportunities is allowing Kai and Jay to be completely uninteresting characters. The only character work that these two get during the ham-fisted grief arc is a disposable, trailer bait, second-long fight scene that's forgotten about almost immediately and then never mentioned again. After Nia is brought back, it's as if their problems don't exist, and they instantly go back to just being regular old Kai and Jay, with viewers being lucky that they'll even mention anything that happened during the time skip.
And then my sister got turned into the ocean, so that's...
After Nia comes back from being stuck in the ocean for a year, you'd think Maya, especially after her interactions with Nia and Seabound, would have some sort of reaction to her return, right? Of course not. It would have been nice to have a scene where we see her reaction to finding out her deceased daughter is back, or maybe have a reunion scene between the two. Literally anything at all that isn't just Maya showing up with all the other characters in the big final battle and smiling in the background with no lines of dialogue. Anything. Speaking of reactions to Nia's return, remember when Jay said this?
We weren't truly a team until Nia joined, and whether we realized it or not, she was the glue that held us together.
If only we ever saw Nia actually interact with the rest of the team after this point.
What happened to kind and patient?
This is the only conversation Kai and Nia have for the rest of Crystallize. The main idea of Nia's story in Seabound is that life doesn't always go the way you want it to, and the best thing you can do is make the best with what you have. After having watched Crystallize, I can safely say that this message has been completely ruined. Nia comes back, gets her powers back, and everyone acts as if nothing happened. However, Nia's return is used as a bouncing off point for what basically is a worse retread of Kai's powerless arc from Season 11. The first half of this season tries to hype up this idea that you don't need powers to be a big hero who can inspire people, but the rest of the season goes out of its way to show how completely useless Nia is without the powers. She amounts to little more than a Samurai X themed taxi at the best of times and spends the entire season getting completely victimized at the worst. This terrible story hits its lowest point in the final episodes of the season, in which Nia is victimized once again by the mechanic who tells her this.
Oh well, what do we got here? The girl ninja who lost her powers but still thinks she's a ninja. When are you gonna learn? Your time is over. Guess that means you're not a real ninja, just a girl in a costume.
Until Nia gets her powers back, she's completely unable to do anything of note against the Overlord and his forces, even in comparison to characters like Akino. This effectively proves the mechanic's viewpoints about her right. See, you can be a hero without powers, you just won't be important. You'll sit on the sidelines and watch as the real heroes do real hero stuff. This season sees the ninja fighting against the Overlord, for a third time. Not an Overlord-like character, but the actual guy. How is he back? Vandalism. Bit of a tangent here, this part isn't in the script, but the clippings moment would be a lot more impactful if this was actually built up to. Like, say, imagine at the start of season 13 when the postman comes, he also delivers a clipping to Wu and he looks at it confused. Just even something small like that would have been nice and a much needed bit of setup, because this moment just feels like payoff with absolutely no setup. Only having one scene in this season where we receive a clipping, and it's after the Overlord's revealed to be back anyway, so there's no mystery even to be built up here, is not sufficient setup for something as game-changing as this. Okay, tangent over. One moment that I think is particularly wild is this scene where Wu reveals that he feared the Overlord would return this entire time, and then implies that his plan was to just wait until he dies and then make the Overlord's return someone else's problem with no forewarning.
You knew he would return?
I feared it. One day. But I would not have expected him for several generations.
After what we went through in Season 11 with Asphira and the Ninja, it makes no sense for him to act like this. Furthermore, the inclusion of the Overlord in this season is a very good example of well-brained Ninjago's obsession with hollow nostalgia and retreads. The defeat of the Overlord at the end of the season can basically just be described as the Season 2 fight, except Lloyd's Dragon has 4 heads now. They just shoot creation powers at the bad guy again. Given this season's insistence on the Overlord being able to come back after being defeated, this makes Crystallize as a climax to anything, let alone the entire storyline, feel completely unfulfilling. What's stopping the Overlord from just coming back again once they run out of Pyrosnake recolors? My problem isn't that the Overlord came back, the problem is that they did nothing new with him. Aspects of the season seem to try and place an emphasis on finally destroying the Overlord once and for all.
If they knew he was coming,
Maybe they know how we can defeat him once and for all.
But nothing is done with this setup, and it results in what, as mentioned before, just feels like a retread of Season 2, except with more characters and 4 times the dragon heads. This is the 3rd time in about 7 years that the people of Ninjago City have celebrated the Overlord's defeat, because this season could not come up with anything new. Speaking of returning characters, the Council of the Crystal King was totally mishandled. It's now clear as day that despite being one of the longest Ninjago seasons, this season did not have enough runtime to fit in satisfying stories for all of these characters. Had plenty of runtime to do tons of pointless fake out deaths though. Their defeats in this season range from downgrades from their original conclusions, like how Mystery went from being ripped limb from limb by Garmadon to being abruptly crushed by a sign, which is literally a moment ripped straight from a 1928 silent comedy film. Or in the case of villains like Asphira, they literally just do the exact same thing again, except it's way less cool this time. One of the most egregious examples of this is Pythor. One of the big reasons people wanted this guy back after Day of the Departed was to give him some proper closure to his story, rather than just escaping and that's it, we never see him again. In response to this concern, Crystallize decides to end his story in this season by just having him disappear again. That's it, what was the point of any of this? What is the point of bringing back these characters if you're going to do absolutely nothing new with them outside of hollow fan service? I particularly don't like how the mechanic fixates on the idea of Nia being useless without her biological powers. Given how the mechanic is the representation of regular ordinary people being able to do insane stuff, I feel like that despite being the villain and he's obviously supposed to be wrong here, this sudden out of nowhere line of thinking is a total portrayal of his character and what he represents. If someone like King Vangelis was saying something like this, then sure, maybe I could buy it coming from him. But the mechanic? I don't think so. And then King Vangelis just gets stuck in a pothole, oh my god. Harumi is the worst example of these returning villains, but I think it's best we save her for later. This video is already very negative, and I don't want it to be just an angry rant, so let's take a positivity break to discuss what I liked about the season. Crystallize is stunning. Even though I think the writing of WildBrain Ninjago has been a very mixed bag, the production of the show has never been better. WildBrain Studios' emphasis on squash and stretch animation is fantastic and continues to pay off here. The soundtrack of Crystallize is excellent as always for Ninjago, and the season delivers all the spectacle any fan could have asked for. Speaking of audio stuff, the voice acting in this season is fantastic, and I'd argue that the actors managed to deliver the best performances in series history, despite the material. Speaking of actors, I think the Ninjago crew worked around the obstacles surrounding Cole excellently. Kirby Morrow's passing was a tragedy and a huge blow to the storyline, and I think casting Andrew Francis as Cole was the best move they could have made in response to this. I believe that Kirby Morrow would be proud of how the Ninjago team handled the cards they were dealt here. Speaking of addressing real-world death, the way they handled Jake in Season 15 Episode 25 Safe Haven is beautiful. I think Jake's last scene being a moment where he's able to reunite with his parents is wonderful, and a heartfelt tribute to the real-life Jake. In terms of representation for disabilities or minority groups, this is absolutely the best Ninjago season. The seasons of Ninjago that were produced by WildBrain have been making a ton of progress in this regard in the past few years, and it's something I'm completely here for. Although at this point, I feel like Ninjago should have the guts to do more for gay people than just putting a flag on a car.
Food in the 7 seas!
There I am, Gary, there I am!
Dareth was handled surprisingly well in this season. My big issue with Dareth over the years since about 2015 seasons is that he's just slowly become a really weird creep on screen who obsesses over Gale gossip and is just sexist for no reason.
Oh, hey sweetheart. Mind sticking around for a segment to teach girls how to apply makeup?
Crystallize, for the first time in years, allows Dareth to just be who he actually is, the ninja's silly and goofy ally. Much better. I think Garmadon was handled alright here. I don't think he's particularly great, and it's very much the bare minimum for him, and his ending is pretty unfulfilling to say the least. He never really properly reconciles with Lloyd, and Lloyd never really trusts him. But as far as character arcs go in this season, he was passable enough, I guess. Although the logic around him being here makes zero sense, which will be covered in a little bit. The Benefit of Grief is an excellent episode, and the one that really left an impression on me. I think Zane's realization that all emotions, including negative ones, are important as they give you new perspective and a push to do the right thing, is a really bold and interesting message. And then the rest of the season completely undercuts it. After a solid message about how all emotions are important and that suppressing them rather than meaningfully confronting them is unhealthy, the season bafflingly chooses to spend its entire runtime for Lloyd by having him repress his Oni side. I hate to sound entitled here, but the more natural ending for Lloyd's character arc would have been to have him embrace both the Oni and Dragon sides of himself, taking the healthy parts of both spectrums and using that to create a permanent balance, or at least permanently defeat the Overlord. The idea presented in Crystallize that using Oni power makes you automatically completely evil and uncaring by default is baffling, and within the context of Ninjago, straight up not true. Look at Mustake, for example. From watching her scenes in the Oni trilogy, it's clear that despite being an Oni who constantly uses her powers, she still has a huge heart and capacity to care. I don't know why Crystallized places such a big emphasis on the idea that Oni are completely careless beings, because anyone who's watched even a single episode of Hunted would know that this isn't true at all. Garmadon wasn't selfish in March the Oni because he's an Oni, he was selfish because Harumi tried to resurrect only the worst parts of himself. That was the point. While we're on the topic, the inclusion of Oni power in this season completely misunderstands what came before. The season places this huge emphasis on the idea that Garmadon's powers came from anger and fear, which just isn't true at all.
That's the spirit, just like your father. Anger makes you stronger.
No, not really.
Conflict fuels him.
He was powering up.
Don't you get it? The fight is what fuels me!
The idea of Garmadon's powers is that they're built on conflict. This is plainly apparent in Season 8 where Garmadon begins unlocking his power by sparring with the Sons of Garmadon, or in March of the Oni where Garmadon has a brief fight with the ninja in order to get his powers back. Based on this fight scene from Season 10, he doesn't seem very angry or fearful to me. Even then, going under the assumption that Oni power is built on anger and fear actually, which is why Garmadon was able to access it during his time in Vinny's apartment, why not just get really angry or fearful and break out of Cell 1? So when Garmadon shows up in Crystallized living a life of non-violence in Vinny's apartment, yet is fully able to use his Oni power more so than ever, I don't think it's much of a nitpick to at the very least expect an explanation for why his powers operate completely differently now. The only explanation I can think of for why this happened is that they wanted the fan service of bringing Garmadon back and having him do cool things with his powers, and although they realized that there was no way they could do that without undercutting what we saw in Season 10 of the Garmadon comic, they decided to just try and do it anyway and hope you wouldn't notice. Speaking of things that don't need to be there, the original 4 ninja have nothing substantial to go through in this season. Outside of one pretty good Zane episode, which the rest of the season undermines anyway, the ninja have no worthwhile character arc to go through in what was advertised to be their final stretch. Kai and Jay went into the season with potential for a really interesting character story, but came out with nothing to offer outside of, and then they got Nia back. Cole brings the team together at the start of the season, which is great, but there isn't an arc for him after the fact, and all Zane does outside of benefit of grief is have his 5 millionth melodramatic fake out death. All 4 of the original ninja are only in the season to do cool fight scenes and deliver action lines, and that's about it. Now, to clarify, the problem isn't that all 4 of the ninja aren't super 3-dimensional in the same season, because every season dumps down the other characters to some extent in order to give its focus character focus. The problem is the focuses in question this season don't have very good character arcs, and the characters that are 2-dimensional had huge potential for an arc this season which was completely missed. In a TV show known for its great character work, this was very disappointing. I think now is a better time than any to take a quick break for the Crystallized Part 2 Inconsistency Hour. Brought to you by the inevitable comments I'll get on this video saying that all I'm doing is nitpicking and completely ignoring all of the other discussion on the character arcs.
When I was resurrected from the Cursed Realm,
I have seen things in the departed realm.
You're an Oni. The Oni are incapable of caring. All they do is destroy.
Surrender.
Never heard of it.
That was your last mistake, Miss Dake.
Wherever he is, he's not really a problem right now.
My father's been found? What? Nobody knows where my father is.
Meanwhile,
Wherever he is, he's not really a problem right now.
Nobody knows where my father is.
Warren sent a distress call to some queen.
Princess Vanya of Shintaro.
Queen Vanya, the rightful ruler of Shintaro.
I do not know if there is anything after this life for beings such as you or I.
Because I corrupted the great devourer and set him against you.
Okay, for real though, how do you just forget the gender of one of the most important parts of Ninjago's entire lore? Something about the final battle in Crystallized that's completely wild to me is the scale of it. We're constantly told that this is the biggest battle in Ninjago history, but we never see that. When Vanya said she'd bring the entire army of Shintaro, I'd like to think she meant a little more than just 3 guys. Even the battle at the end of season 13 had higher on-screen scales than this. The only reason we have any idea that this is the biggest battle in history is because the characters say it is. And as anyone with a basic understanding of filmmaking will tell you, the first fundamental rule of filmmaking is to tell, don't show, obviously. When you actually look at what the producers are showing you here, rather than just relying on clunky dialogue, the final battle is seriously pathetic. I mean, just look at it. It's time to get into the biggest elephant in the entire crystal-covered room, Harumi. Leading up to the return of Harumi, and before it was even confirmed, there was always a ton of concern surrounding if she would ever return and how it would impact her story. The whole appeal of Harumi is that she's the natural evolution of Ninjago's stakes and tone by telling the viewer that you can't save everybody, and dwelling on that failure will only haunt you. The other big thing Harumi does for the story of Ninjago is comment on abuse. Lloyd finds himself pulled into an abusive relationship with Harumi in Season 8 that only exists for her benefit. And so the character arc Lloyd Garmadon gets in the seasons following Season 8 shows him processing the trauma associated with an abusive relationship and trying to work through it. Saving Harumi, someone who arguably didn't even want to be saved, is out of the question. Lloyd needs to find it in himself and his loved ones to try and move on the best he can. Harumi's arc in Season 8 and 9 is about her initially wanting to protect Ninjago, but getting more and more drunk on power and revenge, with those delusions ultimately leading her to the top of that doomed building at the end of Hunted. In her last moments of life, she seems to realize that her actions leading up to this were wrong, and what Lloyd told her about civilian casualties in Sons of Garmadon was true.
Is this what you want? To destroy the city? Create more victims? Just think how many others will be made like you. This isn't what you want.
Oh no. This is just the beginning.
And now she'll have to be one of those casualties. This ending is ironic because on top of all of this, it puts her exactly in her parents' position, really showing how her anger has allowed the cycle of destruction to repeat. Or maybe she's just sad that she's about to die, or will never see the Sons of Garmadon again, or that she failed her adopted father. This is the entire appeal of the scene. We don't know. There were so many different possibilities for what exactly could have been going through Harumi's head in those final moments, but whichever one was true, we didn't know. It was all down to the interpretation of the viewer. A perfect way to end out one of Ninjago's best characters. Harumi's return and subsequent redemption arc in Crystallized was every bit the disaster it had the potential to be, because it completely ruins all of this. For a start, this story cleanly lays out Harumi's viewpoints. As mentioned before with the up to interpretation stuff, this is a huge problem and already demolishes a lot of the impact that her arc in the Oni trilogy left the viewer, but ultimately, even something as bad as that is just the tip of the iceberg. Harumi's redemption arc, if you could even call it that, is possibly one of the worst plot lines in the history of the show. Let's discuss the peace in the dark idea first and foremost. A sound motivator on paper, and honestly a solid way to justify why Harumi's a bad guy again. The problem is, in what conceivable world could turning people into zombies be a way of keeping them safe? It'd be pretty interesting if the season actually elaborated on this idea and showed us precisely what Harumi is thinking about this, but instead just rammed that peace in the dark crap into Lloyd's throat, refused to elaborate, and used that time for something better, like Ninjago's 5 millionth melodramatic fake-out death. I get that the writers wanted Harumi to be a villain again, while preserving her apparent change of heart in Hunted, but this was the most bafflingly nonsensical way to go about it. What's worse though is that her actual redemption arc at the end of the season, again if you can even call it that, addresses absolutely none of this. Harumi is absolved of absolutely all sin by attacking the Overlord after realizing that he is the one who made the Great Devourer do the things it did. This is what they staked the return of Harumi on, a last minute, out of nowhere connection between two long obsolete characters. After Harumi gets angry at the Overlord and cuts his arm off, which is regrown seconds later anyways, she is instantly completely absolved of all sin and is totally ready to be one of the ninja's bodies. Where do I begin? This would be the equivalent of Breaking Bad deciding to undo Walter White's perfect conclusion and then have him become completely absolved of all sin by killing the guy who invented cancer. Or if Darth Vader was instantly forgiven and reintegrated into society because he killed the dude who invented dying in childbirth. These hypothetical endings ignore the fact that the character is more than a tragic backstory. In her time, Harumi has done way more damage to Ninjago City than the Devourer could have ever hoped to, by bringing the city to its knees twice over. Is there any effort to acknowledge this from Crystallized? No. By the end of the arc, again if you can even call it that, she doesn't even acknowledge that any of what she did was wrong, she never once apologizes to Lloyd for ruining his life, her quote-unquote redemption solely boils down to her finding someone else to blame for her problems again, without taking any accountability for her own heinous actions. A big motivator for Harumi's character in Season 8 that Crystallized seems to have forgotten about midway through, wasn't that the Devourer killed her parents, although that was definitely a big part of it. It was that the ninja were incompetent in the area of preventing these threats from being allowed to rise up and hurt people, while the city paraded them around as perfect heroes. What does Crystallized do to actually address this huge issue she took with the ninja? Nothing. I guess the more important use of that runtime was to do another melodramatic fake-out death that gets reversed seconds later. This is especially stupid because the start of the season seems like it wants to try and expand on Harumi's motives, but nothing is done with this setup.
We promised to protect Ninjago.
Like you protected it from that video game thing. And the giant sea serpent. And those creepy black clouds.
It is completely out of character for Harumi to go from absolutely hating the ninja and thinking that they are what's wrong with Ninjago to being one of their good friends, with no apparent cause whatsoever. I think one of the worst parts of this already very bad story though is this line here.
You should have destroyed him when you had the chance, but I see now that you still have feelings for him.
What do you mean, still? The entire point of her character in Season 8 is that she actually had no feelings for Lloyd whatsoever. That was the entire point of her plan and her ruse in season 8. I don't get it. Did you fall asleep for the last 3 episodes of the season or something? How do you miss the point of a character this badly?
Let her go! This is between us!
No, Lloyd. There was never anything between us.
This redemption story is especially stupid because she was perfectly okay of recruiting Pythor, the Serpentine who unleashed the snake that killed Harumi's parents with the very explicit intention of killing all of the humans for her supervillain team.
Awaken the insatiable appetite of the beast that will consume all of Ninjago!
Before I get comments saying that, oh well, maybe she didn't know here, plenty of Ninjago media implies that Pythor's actions are well-known information, and if Harumi was able to access information like the story of the Oni and the Dragon, I'm sure she could have taken a trip down to the Hall of Villainy and found this. Even then, one of the first scenes of the Council of the Crystal King altogether is all of the villains having a conversation about the things they've done. Are you seriously gonna tell me that a loudmouth like Pythor would be keeping his mouth shut here the entire time? It's not nitpicking to tear the plot apart like this. The critical plot points are so bad that they instantly fall apart when you think about the story even on a surface level. Not to mention, Lloyd's character is bafflingly handled in this context. Think about it. In the course of about 4 episodes, Harumi seemingly killed all of Lloyd's friends and laughed about it, with her straight up saying that she's solely doing this because she wants to.
Turn it off! Harumi! Please!
I can't, Lloyd. I mean, I could, technically, but I won't.
In reaction to this, Lloyd has absolutely no problem trying to forgive Harumi. Garmlord, on the other hand, who actually is showing signs of change to Lloyd, is comparatively offered no forgiveness or even kindness. Both of these positions for Lloyd would be fine enough on paper, but the problem is that they directly contradict each other. Bringing us back to the abuse references with Harumi again, one of the biggest tenets of real-life abusive relationships is that if you stick with a person for just a little longer, things may start finally turning around. Invalidating Lloyd's borderline obsessive efforts to fix Harumi, in spite of her showing no interest in changing herself, the Ninjago writers have essentially encouraged children to put themselves in that position and painted it as the right thing to do. I don't think I need to say it, but just in case I do, this is an absolutely horrible and irresponsible message to be sending to children, and I don't know what was going through the writers' heads when they did this. What this arc should have done is that rather than listening to every single YouTube comment ever saying that they should give Harumi a generic redemption arc, they should have actually stayed consistent to the seasons that came before and gave us a story about breaking Lloyd's emotional dependence on fixing Harumi, allowing him to move on. It would have been the more interesting and consistent direction to take Lloyd's character in, and probably would have been the better message to send to children. Anything that doesn't encourage them to stick with abusive relationships. The fact that I've been able to talk about this season in depth for this long now and not mention Skylar's appearance in it once should be telling. She continues to be a completely uninteresting and flat character. Overall, Ninjago Crystallized is a giant quagmire of conflicting themes and ideas that amount to little more than a worse rehash of season 2 when all is said and done. It wants to tackle grief, but does little to nothing with it outside of one episode and the most surface level storytelling there is. It wants to push the message that all emotions are important, but ends the season with the protagonist suppressing his emotions. It tries to be about change and redemption, but does so little with it that it's debatable that you can even call Harumi's story redemption.
You chose the wrong side, Harumi.
When things turn out bad or below expectation, I don't really like to just say bad and then have that be the end of it. I think it's important to make a good faith effort to figure out why something turned out the way it did. This Tommy Andreasen tweet from last year describes the writing process for Ninjago as a big old tug of war, with Crystallized representing that more so than ever. Having seen this tweet, I decided to take to IMDb and have a look at the list of writers working on this season. And in my opinion, I think the problem here is that there were too many creative cooks in the kitchen. Crystallized had 2 times the amount of writers that season 9 Hunted did, and I think this may be why a lot of people feel like the season is so disconnected. Whatever the case, this season does not feel like a singular coherent vision in the way that previous seasons did. Keep in mind this is all speculation here and I could be wrong. I want to clarify that the problem here is not specifically the writers that worked on Ninjago Crystallized. I'm sure they're all talented people. The concern that I can see is that with 6 people, there will inevitably be so many differing ideas on where the story should go, and I have a feeling that this is the reason why the season feels so disconnected structurally and thematically. However, at the end of the day, this is very broad speculation on my part and I could be totally wrong about it, so don't take it as fact. Ultimately though, Ninjago Crystallized is a symptom of a larger problem that's been troubling the Ninjago franchise for years now: unoriginality. I think that this is one of the biggest problems of the post-2019 seasons, and at this point, the constant retreading really makes me feel like the show should have ended years ago. And in case you're unsure of what I mean by that, the ninja are picked off one by one by a mysterious, seemingly omnipotent threat until only Jay and Nia are left standing, with Jay ultimately overcoming the villain after Nia's fake-out death by speaking from the heart. The ninja face a new spin on one of their classic enemies, except it can reform itself now after destroyed, while the central ninja learns secrets about their parents after a kindly ally is revealed to be the twist villain. Lloyd is put in a position where he must realize that not everyone he meets is like Harumi, again. The ninja face a purple, British-voiced character who wants to take revenge on humanity by collecting several MacGuffins using the help of his army of snakes in order to resurrect a massive snake that will destroy everything, who ends up turning on that villain and eating him. In the end, the only way to stop this threat is for the central ninja of the season to fully tap into their elemental powers and sacrifice themselves so the other ninja and the city can survive. The season 1 similarities come down to even the term surface dwellers being reused.
If only to teach the surface dwellers a lesson.
Surface dwellers? In my temple!
The ending of Crystallized is one of the worst offenders for this. After the already recycled Overlord plot from season 2, the season ends happily with the ninja rebuilding their monastery. We ended the only trilogy in the exact same way, with the ninja celebrating having defeated the darkness in their newly rebuilt monastery. You may as well just skip the past 5 seasons outright. The constant retreading seems to get worse and worse with every season, except for Master of the Mountain. That one wasn't as bad in this regard. And with the problem getting worse and worse, my interest in the story dwindles. Properties can't survive into future generations by just doing the same thing over and over again. They have to change and evolve with time, which requires risk-taking. The big new 2023 show is just around the corner for Ninjago fans, and my hype for this theme is at an all-time low. After years of recycling and retreading, I don't have faith that this will be the big new thing. I hope I'm wrong though. Ninjago's two greatest strengths are its ability to reinvent itself and its strong character work, two things which have been sorely lacking in Crystallized. Going forward, we need new installments that try bold new things with the story and deliver good character work. There may be unsalvageable aspects of the plot going forward thanks to Crystallized, but that doesn't mean the entire franchise has to be doomed. The plot direction in Crystallized was so alienating to me that I'm not interested in being actively hyped for this IP anymore. And if the 2023 show wants to change that, it's gonna have to fight to win me back, but I don't believe that's impossible. Tommy Andreasen and the Ninjago crew are talented people who have made great seasons. Going forward, we need content that actually feels new, and with strong character work, and most importantly, doesn't drop everything that made the show appealing for easy fan service. My complaints of Crystallized don't ask for Ninjago to meet an unrealistic standard. All I want is for the show to reach the quality bar that it set for itself.